Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. The roar of the crowd mingled with the crash of waves as Jake Anderson stepped onto the sun-baked sand of Jeffreys Bay. He inhaled deeply, savoring the salt-tinged air that had become as familiar to him as the scent of surf wax. At 22, Jake was no stranger to high-stakes competitions, but the J-Bay Open held a special place in the surfing world and in his heart. You ready to make history, mate? The Australian drawl belonged to Mick, a veteran surfer whose sun-bleached hair and weathered skin spoke of countless hours battling the waves. Jake grinned, his bright blue eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and determination. Born ready, Mick, this is our year. As they made their way down the beach, fans called out, waving signs and snapping photos. Jake waved back, his easy smile masking the knot of anticipation tightening in his stomach. He'd dreamed of this moment since he was a grommet, barely able to stand on a board. The competitors' area was a hive of activity. Surfers stretched, waxed their boards, and engaged in their pre-heat rituals. Jake found a quiet spot and began his own warm-up, his movements fluid and practiced. "Looking good out there, Anderson," came a voice tinged with both admiration and challenge. Jake looked up to see Kai Samuels, his biggest rival and the current world champion. "Thanks, Kai," Jake replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Waves are looking epic today." Kai nodded, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. "May the best man win." As Kai walked away, Jake's coach, Tom, approached. "Don't let him get in your head, kid. You've got this." Jake nodded, refocusing on his preparation. He'd known Kai since they were both up-and-comers on the junior circuit. Their rivalry had pushed Jake to new heights, but it had also cost him more than one trophy. The announcers' voices boomed across the beach, calling the first heat of surfers to the water. Jake wasn't up yet, but he made his way to the water's edge, studying the waves with a practiced eye. "What do you think?" Tom asked, standing beside him. Jake pointed to a spot just beyond the break. "There's a sweet spot forming out there. If it holds, we could see some monster waves in the final." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear. Now remember the strategy we talked about. Don't waste your energy on the small stuff. Wait for the big ones." As the day progressed, the excitement on the beach grew palpable. Jake advanced through his early heats with a combination of style and raw power that had the crowd on their feet. Between rounds, he caught snippets of commentary from the announcers. "Anderson is on fire today, folks. Did you see that aerial? The kid's defying gravity." Jake tried to tune out the praise, staying focused on the task at hand. But it was hard to ignore the electricity in the air. Something special was happening, and everyone could feel it. As the semi-finals approached, Jake found a quiet moment to call his family back in California. His mom answered on the first ring. "Jake, we're all watching. You're doing amazing, sweetie." He could hear the rest of his family cheering in the background. "Thanks, Mom. How's Dad holding up?" There was a chuckle on the other end. "Oh, you know your father. He's pacing a hole in the carpet. Hold on, he wants to talk to you." A moment later, his dad's gruff voice came through. "Looking good out there, son. Remember what I always told you? Trust the board, trust the wave." Jake finished, smiling. It was his dad's mantra, drilled into him since his first surf lesson. "That's my boy. Now go show him what a California boy can do." As Jake hung up, he felt a renewed surge of energy. He wasn't just surfing for himself. He was surfing for everyone who had believed in him, supported him, pushed him to be better. The semi-finals were a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Jake found himself in a zone he'd only reached a handful of times in his career. Every wave seemed to bend to his will, every maneuver executed with flawless precision. When the final scores were announced, Jake had secured his spot in the final heat with the highest score of the competition so far. As he walked back up the beach, the crowd's cheers washing over him, Jake caught sight of a familiar face. Sarah, a marine biologist he'd met earlier in the week, waved from behind the barrier. "That was incredible," she called out. "I've never seen anything like it." Jake jogged over, grinning. Thanks, I didn't know you'd be here. Sarah laughed. Are you kidding? The whole town's talking about this final. Besides, I couldn't miss the chance to see the great Jake Anderson in action. There was something in her eyes, a warmth that made Jake's heart skip a beat. Listen, he said, surprising himself, when this is all over, maybe we could… Anderson! Tom's voice cut through the moment. Final prep, let's go. Jake gave Sarah an apologetic smile. Duty calls, wish me luck? So you don't need it, she replied with a wink, but good luck anyway. As Jake jogged back to the competitors' area, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions and sensations. The thrill of competition, the pride of his family, the unexpected connection with Sarah. It all swirled together, fueling his determination. The anticipation built as the announcers called the finalists to the water. Jake and Kai stood side by side, boards under their arms, eyes fixed on the horizon. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed, we are in for a treat today. Two of the world's best surfers, Jake Anderson and Kai Samuels, going head-to-head in what promises to be an epic final. The waves are building, folks. This could be one for the history books. As they waded into the water, Kai turned to Jake. No hard feelings, yeah? Whatever happens out there. Jake nodded, respect mingling with competitive fire. May the best surfer win. They paddled out, taking their positions in the lineup. The first set rolled in and both surfers sprang into action. Jake caught the second wave, carving a beautiful line and finishing with a flourish that had the crowd roaring. Back and forth they went, trading waves and pulling off increasingly daring maneuvers. The score remained tight, neither surfer able to gain a significant advantage. As the clock ticked down, Jake felt a shift in the water. He turned, scanning the horizon, and his heart leaped. There, in the distance, was a massive swell building. This was it, the wave that could decide everything. Jake paddled furiously, positioning himself perfectly. As the wave approached, he could hear the crowd's excitement reaching a fever pitch. This was the moment he'd dreamed of, trained for, fought for. With a surge of power, Jake popped up on his board, feeling the awesome force of the ocean beneath him. As he began to carve up the face of the wave, time seemed to slow. Every movement felt precise, every decision crystal clear. In that moment, Jake Anderson wasn't just a surfer. He was a dancer, an artist, a force of nature himself. He was every early morning practice, every wipeout, every triumph and disappointment that had led him to this point. As he completed a particularly daring aerial, Jake caught a glimpse of the beach. The entire crowd was on its feet. Tom was pumping his fist in the air, and even Kai, waiting for his own wave, nodded in grudging admiration. Jake's heart soared. He knew with unshakable certainty that this was the ride of his life. Whatever, the judges decided, whatever the final score, he would always have this perfect moment. As he carved toward the final section of the wave, Jake allowed himself a smile. The J-Bay Open title was within his grasp. All he had to do was stick the landing. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake Anderson's eyes snapped open. He lay still for a moment, listening to the distant roar of the ocean, feeling the anticipation thrumming through his veins. Today was the day. The massive swell they'd all been waiting for was finally rolling in. Jake swung his legs out of bed, wincing slightly at the soreness in his muscles from yesterday's heats. He padded over to the window of his beachfront rental and drew back the curtains. The sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. Massive waves were already visible on the horizon, their white caps gleaming in the early morning light. Even from this distance, Jake could tell they were easily double the size of yesterday's surf. A mixture of excitement and trepidation coursed through him. "Holy shit," he murmured, reaching for his phone to check the latest forecast. As he scrolled through the data, a grin spread across his face. The meteorologists had nailed it. This was shaping up to be one of the biggest swells to hit Jeffreys Bay in years. The World Surf League couldn't have asked for better conditions for the final day of competition. A sharp knock on his door jolted Jake from his reverie. "Jake, you up?" It was Tom, his coach. "Yeah, come in," Jake called back, tossing his phone on the bed and reaching for a t-shirt. Tom burst into the room, his eyes wild with excitement. "You seen it yet? It's a goddamn monster out there." Jake nodded, unable to keep the smile off his face. "Looks like we're in for one hell of a ride today." "You got that right, kid," Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Now let's get some food in you. We've got a big day ahead." As they made their way to the small kitchen, Jake's phone buzzed with incoming messages. It seemed everyone in the surfing world was abuzz with news of the swell. Over a breakfast of protein-packed smoothies and whole-grain toast, Jake and Tom pored over the day's schedule and strategized. The increased wave size would change everything. Timing, positioning, even the types of maneuvers that would score big with the judges. "Remember," Tom said, leaning in, "with waves this size, it's not just about the flashy stuff. Control is key. Show the judges you can handle whatever the ocean throws at you." Jake nodded, absorbing every word. This was the kind of day that could make or break a career. He intended to make the most of it. As they drove to the beach, the excitement in the air was palpable. Crowds had already gathered along the shoreline, their chatter punctuated by gasps and cheers as particularly massive sets rolled in. News. Vans lined the parking lot, reporters doing live stand-ups with the epic waves as their backdrop. Jake made his way to the competitors' area, nodding to his fellow surfers as he passed. The usual camaraderie was tinged with a nervous energy today. Everyone knew what was at stake. "Anderson!" a familiar voice called out. Jake turned to see Kai jogging towards him, board under his arm. "Can you believe this swell, man? It's insane," Jake grinned, bumping fists with his rival. "Gonna be one for the books, that's for sure." Kai's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and challenge. "May the best man win, yeah?" "You know it," Jake replied, the competitive fire in his belly flaring. They parted ways. Jake caught sight of Sarah standing near the judge's tower. She waved, and he felt a flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with the upcoming competition. "Good luck out there," she called as he approached. "Though from what I've seen, you make your own luck." Jake felt his cheeks warm slightly. "Thanks. It's going to be intense out there today." Sarah nodded, her expression turning serious. "Just be careful, okay? I've been monitoring the shark activity in the area, and with a swell like this..." Jake's stomach tightened slightly, but he pushed the concern aside. Shark encounters were a reality of surfing, but dwelling on them was a sure way to throw off. "Your game." "I'll keep my eyes open," he assured her. "Thanks for the heads up." The blare of the competition horn cut through their conversation. Jake's heat wasn't for another hour, but he wanted to watch the early rounds closely. Every bit of information about how the waves were breaking could be crucial. As he watched the first heat, Jake felt his adrenaline begin to surge. The waves were even more impressive up close, towering walls of water that dwarfed the surfers. Who dared to challenge them? Wipeouts were spectacular and frequent, the water patrol earning their pay as they raced to pluck fallen surfers from the churning whitewater. "Jesus," Tom muttered beside him. "It's like they're surfing a liquid mountain out there." Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving the water. He was cataloging every detail, the way the waves were pitching, the sweet spots where they seemed to hold their shape the longest, the danger zones where even the most skilled surfers were getting caught out. As his heat approached, Jake went through his warm-up routine with meticulous care. He stretched, jogged along the beach to get his blood flowing, and spent several minutes in quiet meditation, visualizing himself conquering the monstrous waves. Finally, it was time. As Jake waxed his board one last time, he felt a calm settle over him. This was what he lived for, the challenge, the rush, the dance with nature in its rawest form. "You've got this, kid," Tom said, giving him a final fist bump. "Show him what you're made of." Jake nodded, picked up his board, and made his way to the water's edge. The roar of the crowd faded to a dull murmur as he focused on the task ahead. He watched the sets rolling in, timing his entry perfectly. As he paddled out, the true scale of the waves became apparent. They were easily 15 feet high, possibly more on the bigger sets. Jake felt tiny in comparison, a mere speck against the ocean's might. He took his position in the lineup, exchanging nods with the other surfers in his heat. There was no trash talk now, no playful banter. In conditions like these, there was an unspoken understanding they were all in this together, facing down nature's fury. The horn blared, signaling the start of the heat. Jake's heart pounded as he scanned the horizon, looking for the perfect wave. Patience, he reminded himself. Don't waste energy on anything less than spectacular. Minutes ticked by. Jake let several good waves pass, knowing that something better was coming. His competitors caught rides, some triumphant, others ending in brutal wipeouts. Still, he waited, and then he saw it. A massive swell building in the distance, larger than anything that had come before. This was the one. This was his moment. Jake turned his board, paddling with everything he had. The wave built behind him, a liquid mountain propelling him forward. He could hear the crowd's excitement even over the roar of the water. With a practiced motion, Jake popped up onto his board, finding his balance as the wave's face steepened beneath him. Time seemed to slow as he began his descent, the entire world narrowing to this singular moment of man versus nature. The speed was incredible, the raw power of the ocean threatening to overwhelm him at any second. But Jake held his line, years of training and instinct guiding his every move. He carved a turn, sending up a massive spray that glittered in the sunlight. As he approached the wave's barrel, Jake made a split-second decision. It was risky in these conditions, but he knew it could score big. He pumped once, twice, generating speed, then launched into a massive aerial. For a heart-stopping moment, Jake was airborne, the board beneath his feet separated from the wave. The crowd's roar became a distant buzz as he focused every fiber of his being on the landing. Time snapped back into normal speed as his board reconnected with the water. The impact shuddered through his body, but he held firm, knees bent, arms out for balance. He'd stuck it. The remainder of the ride was a blur of pure instinct and adrenaline. When Jake finally kicked out into the whitewater, his legs trembling with exertion, he knew he'd just had the ride of his life. As he paddled back out for another attempt, he caught sight of the beach. The entire crowd was on its feet, cheering wildly. He saw Tom pumping his fist in the air, and even Kai gave him a begrudging nod of respect. Jake allowed himself a moment of triumph before refocusing on the task at hand. The heat wasn't over yet, and in conditions like these, anything could happen. But as he positioned himself for his next ride, a calm certainty settled over him. He was exactly where he was meant to be, doing what he was born to do. Whatever the ocean threw at him next, Jake Anderson was ready to face it head-on. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the churning waters of Jeffreys Bay. Jake Anderson stood at the water's edge, his board tucked under his arm, heart pounding with anticipation. He had made it to the final heat of the J-Bay Open, and the ocean seemed determined to provide a spectacle worthy of the occasion. Massive waves crashed against the shore, their thunderous roar drowning out the excited chatter of the crowd. Jake's eyes scanned the horizon, watching as monstrous swells built and broke with terrifying force. These weren't just big waves, they were giants, the kind that could make or break a career in a single ride. "You ready for this, kid?" Tom's gruff voice cut through Jake's concentration. Jake turned to his coach, a mix of excitement and nerves evident in his eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be. These waves are insane, Tom." Tom nodded, his weathered face creased with concern. "Listen to me, Jake. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about survival. You see anything out there that doesn't feel right, you bail. No shame in living to surf another day." Jake swallowed hard, nodding. "Got it? Thanks, Tom." As they stood there, Kai approached, his usual cocky demeanor subdued by the gravity of the situation. "Hell of a final, huh, Anderson?" "For you can say that again," Jake replied, eyeing a particularly massive set rolling in. Kai extended his hand. "Whatever happens out there, good luck, man. Stay safe." Jake grasped Kai's hand, a moment of solidarity passing between rivals. "You, too, Kai. See you on the other side." The competition horn blared, signaling the start of the final heat. Jake took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and plunged into the frothing whitewash. Paddling out was a battle in itself. Jake duck-dived through waves that threatened to snap his board in two, each impact a reminder of the ocean's raw power. By the time he reached the lineup, his arms burned with exertion. Jake and Kai bobbed in the water, exchanging glances as they waited for the perfect wave. The other two finalists, Brazilian phenom Rafael Souza and Australian veteran Mick Flanagan, positioned themselves slightly further out. Minutes ticked by, each surfer passing up good waves in hopes of catching something truly spectacular. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of fear and excitement that set everyone's nerves on edge. Suddenly, Raphael turned and started paddling furiously. A monster wave was building behind him, its face as tall as a 3-story building. The crowd on the beach gasped collectively as Raphael popped up and dropped into the wave. Jake watched in awe as the Brazilian surfer carved a beautiful line across the wave's face, showcasing textbook technique in the face of nature's fury. But as Raphael entered the barrel, something went wrong. The wave pitched forward unexpectedly, and Raphael disappeared in a maelstrom of white water. "Shit," Kai cursed beside Jake. They both paddled towards the impact zone, searching for any sign of their fellow competitor. Tense seconds passed before Raphael's head broke the surface. He gasped for air, arm raised to signal he was okay. The jet skis of the water safety team roared into action, quickly plucking the shaken surfer from the turbulent water. As Raphael was whisked back to shore, Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. The waves were only getting bigger, and they still had most of the heat left to go. Mick caught the next big wave, his years of experience evident in the fluid way he navigated the mountainous swell. He finished his ride with a massive aerial, drawing cheers from the crowd and setting a high bar for Jake and Kai. Jake knew he needed to make his move soon. He had yet to catch a wave, and the clock was ticking. That's when he saw it. A behemoth. Of a wave building on the horizon, bigger than anything they'd seen all day. Without hesitation, Jake turned his board and started paddling. He could hear Kai cursing behind him, realizing too late the opportunity Jake had spotted. As the wave approached, Jake's world narrowed to this single moment. The roar of the crowd faded away, replaced by the rush of water and the pounding of his own heart. He felt the wave lift his board, the sudden acceleration making his stomach lurch. With a practiced motion, Jake popped up to his feet, finding his balance as he dropped down the face of the wave. The sheer speed was intoxicating, wind whipping at his face as he carved a line across the wave's surface. Jake pumped his legs, generating speed as he approached the lip of the wave. In a move that drew gasps from the crowd, he launched into a massive aerial, twisting his body in a 360-degree rotation before reconnecting with the water. The landing was rough, the impact shuddering through Jake's entire body, but he held on. As he entered the barrel, time seemed to slow. Jake could see the crowd through the curtain of water, their faces a blur of excitement and fear. For a moment, Jake felt at one with the ocean, as if he and the wave were moving in perfect harmony. But then, he sensed something change. The barrel was closing out faster than he anticipated. Jake crouched lower on his board, willing himself to move faster. The exit was shrinking rapidly, a small circle of light amidst the roaring water. In a split-second decision, Jake leaned into a bottom turn, using the wave's energy to slingshot himself forward. He burst out of the barrel just as it closed behind him, the spray of water nipping at his heels. The crowd erupted in cheers as Jake kicked out into the whitewash, pumping his fists in triumph. As he paddled back out to the lineup, Jake could hear the announcers going wild over the loudspeakers. Unbelievable, folks. Jake Anderson may have just ridden the wave of the tournament. The judges are going to have a tough time scoring that one. Jake allowed himself a small smile as he settled back into position. He had done well, but the heat was far from over. Kai, not to be outdone, caught the next big wave. His ride was impressive, a series of powerful carves and a risky aerial that had the crowd on their feet. As Kai paddled back out, he shot Jake a competitive grin. "Nice ride, Anderson, but this isn't over yet." Jake nodded, the fire of competition burning in his eyes. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Kai." As the final minutes of the heat ticked away, both Jake and Kai managed to catch a few more waves. Each ride pushed the limits of what seemed possible, the two surfers locked in an epic battle against each other and the ocean itself. With just 2 minutes left on the clock, Jake found himself in need of a big score to secure the win. He scanned the horizon desperately, knowing his entire tournament could come down to this final ride. That's when he saw it. A massive swell was building in the distance, larger than anything they'd faced all day. This was it, the wave that could decide everything. Jake turned his board and started paddling with everything he had. He could hear Kai cursing behind him, realizing the opportunity too late. As the wave approached, Jake felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. This was what he lived for, this dance on the razor's edge between triumph and disaster. The wave lifted, him up, its sheer power threatening to overwhelm him. Jake popped up to his feet, finding his balance as he dropped down the face of the liquid giant. Time seemed to slow as Jake began his descent. He was acutely aware of every detail, the spray, of water on his face, the vibration of his board beneath his feet, the roar of the crowd fading into the distance. This wasn't just a wave. It was a mountain of water, a force of nature that could crush him in an instant. But in this moment, Jake Anderson wasn't just a surfer. He was an artist, a daredevil, a man pushing the very limits of what was possible. As he carved across the wave's face, Jake felt a sense of clarity he'd never experienced before. Every movement was precise, every decision crystal clear. He was in perfect harmony with the ocean, riding the fine line between control and chaos. Jake pumped his legs, generating speed as he approached the lip of the wave. In a move that drew gasps from the crowd, he launched into a massive aerial, twisting his body in a 720-degree rotation before reconnecting with the water. The landing was rough, the impact shuddering through Jake's entire body, but he held on. As he entered the barrel, the world disappeared behind a curtain of water. Jake crouched low on his board, surrounded by the awesome power of the ocean. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the wave might close out, trapping Jake in its watery embrace. But with a final burst of speed, he shot out of the barrel, emerging into the sunlight to the deafening roar of the crowd. As Jake kicked out into the whitewash, he knew without a doubt that he had just ridden the wave of his life. Whether it would be enough to win the competition was almost secondary. In this moment, he had achieved something truly extraordinary. The final horn sounded as Jake paddled back towards the beach. He could see Tom jumping up and down on the shore, his face a mix of pride and disbelief. Even Kai paddling nearby gave him a nod of respect. "That was something else, Anderson," Kai called out. "Whatever the judges say, that was one hell of a ride." Jake grinned, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Thanks, man. Guess we'll find out soon enough." As they reached the shallows, Jake and Kai were mobbed by fans and fellow surfers, all clamoring to congratulate them on an epic final. Jake scanned the crowd, his eyes finally landing on Sarah. She stood at the edge of the water, her face beaming with a mixture of relief and admiration. Jake made his way over to her, his legs shaky from exertion. "So," he said with a grin, "how'd I do?" Sarah laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. "Jake Anderson, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You're absolutely insane, you know that." Before Jake could respond, he was swept up in a bear hug by Tom. "That's my boy," the coach roared. "Ride of a lifetime, kid, ride of a goddamn lifetime." As the beach erupted in celebration around him, Jake took a moment to look back at the ocean. The waves continued to roll in, powerful and indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. In that moment, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude. Whatever the final results, he had challenged himself against the very best, both man and nature, and come out on top. As he turned back to the jubilant crowd, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The best waves, the biggest challenges, were still to come. The crowd's roar was deafening as Jake Anderson paddled back out to the lineup. His last wave had been nothing short of spectacular, but with only minutes left in the final heat, he knew he needed one more exceptional ride to clinch the J-Bay Open title. The ocean, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, seemed to swell with renewed vigor. Massive walls of water rose and fell, their faces glassy and inviting, yet fraught with danger. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of adrenaline and sheer determination coursing through his veins. Come on," he muttered to himself, scanning the horizon for that perfect wave. Beside him, Kai Samuels, his fiercest rival, was equally focused, his eyes narrowed against the glare of the setting sun. The announcer's voice boomed across the water, barely audible over the crash of the waves. 2 minutes remaining in this epic final, folks. Anderson and Samuels are neck and neck. It all comes down to this." Jake glanced at Kai, who met his gaze with a nod of respect. "May the best man win, Anderson," Kai called out, a hint of a smile, playing on his lips. "You got that right," Jake replied, returning the nod. Despite their rivalry, there was a bond between them, forged in the crucible of competition and their shared love for the sport. Suddenly, Jake felt it, a shift in the water beneath him. He turned, his experienced eyes immediately spotting the building swell on the horizon. This was it, the wave that could make history. Without hesitation, Jake began to paddle, his powerful strokes propelling him towards the approaching mountain of water. He could hear Kai cursing behind him, realizing too late the opportunity Jake had seized. As the wave lifted his board, time seemed to slow. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, feel every droplet of water on his skin. With practiced precision, he popped up to his feet, finding his balance as he began the descent down the face of the wave. It was massive, easily the biggest wave of the day. As Jake carved his initial turn, he felt the raw power of the ocean threatening to overwhelm him. But he held firm, years of training and instinct guiding his every move. The crowd on the beach was going wild, their cheers carried on the wind to Jake's ears. He blocked it all out, his world narrowing to just him and the wave. As he approached the lip, Jake made a split-second decision. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but if he pulled it off, he pumped his legs, generating speed, then launched into a massive aerial. For a heart-stopping moment, Jake was airborne, his board separated from the wave as he rotated in midair. The world spun around him, a blur of blue sky and churning water. Then, with a bone-jarring impact, he reconnected with the wave's face. The landing was rough, sending shockwaves through his body. But Jake held on, crouching low to maintain his balance. As he carved back towards the pocket, Jake saw his opportunity. The wave was beginning to barrel, forming a perfect tube. Without hesitation, he drove his board forward, disappearing behind the curtain of water. Inside the barrel, time seemed to stand still. Jake was surrounded by a liquid cathedral, sunlight, filtering through the wall of water to create a mesmerizing play of light and shadow. He could see the beach through the wave's mouth, a distant circle of light that seemed to be shrinking with each passing second. Jake crouched lower on his board, willing himself to move faster. The roar of the wave was deafening, the pressure of tons of water above and around him almost palpable. For a moment, fear gripped him. Would he make it out? But Jake pushed the doubt aside, focusing every fiber of his being on the rapidly closing exit. He leaned into a bottom turn, using the wave's energy to slingshot himself forward. The circle of light grew larger, brighter. With a final burst of speed, Jake shot out of the barrel just as it closed behind him, the spray of water nipping at his heels. The crowd's roar became a physical force as he completed his ride, punctuating it with a flourish as he kicked out into the whitewash. As Jake began to paddle back out, he heard the final horn blare, signaling the end of the heat. It was over. He had done all he could. Exhausted but exhilarated, Jake made his way towards the beach. As he approached the shallows, he saw Tom running towards him, his face a mix of pride and disbelief. "Jake! My God, kid, that was—" Tom seemed at a loss for words, a rarity for the usually loquacious coach. Jake grinned, the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "How'd it look from the beach?" "Look? It was goddamn perfect," Tom exclaimed, helping Jake with his board, as they walked up the sand. "I've never seen anything like it. That aerial into the barrel. Jesus, kid, you might have just made history." The beach was a frenzy of activity. Fans cheered and clapped as Jake made his way through the crowd. Journalists clamored for comments, their cameras flashing incessantly. Through it all, Jake scanned the faces, looking for one in particular. He found her near the judge's tower. Sarah's eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and relief as she ran towards him. "Jake, oh my God, are you okay?" She threw her arms around him, not caring about his soaked wetsuit. Jake hugged her back, surprised by the intensity of her concern. "I'm fine, Sarah. Better than fine, actually. That was insane. Reckless. The most incredible thing I've ever seen." Sarah pulled back, her expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. Jake laughed. "All of the above?" Before Sarah could respond, Kai approached, his expression unreadable. For a moment, tension hung in the air between the two rivals. Then Kai broke into a grin, extending his hand. "Hell of a ride, Anderson. If I had to lose. To anyone, I'm glad it was to that wave." Jake clasped Kai's hand, feeling a surge of respect for his competitor. "Thanks, man. You pushed me to my limit out there, As they stood there, the announcer's voice boomed across the beach. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have the final scores. In second place with an incredible performance, Kai Samuels." The crowd cheered as Kai raised his hand in acknowledgement, a rueful smile on his face. "And your J-Bay Open champion, with a near-perfect score on his final wave, Jake Anderson." The beach erupted. Jake felt himself being lifted onto the shoulders of his fellow surfers, the roar of the crowd washing over him like a wave. As he was carried towards the podium, Jake's eyes met Sarah's in the crowd. She was beaming at him, and in that moment, Jake felt a different kind of thrill, one that had nothing to do with surfing. The award ceremony passed in a blur of cheers, handshakes, and flashing cameras. As Jake stood on the podium, the weight of the trophy in his hands, he looked out at the ocean. The waves continued to roll in, powerful and indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. In that moment, Jake felt a profound sense of connection to the ocean, to his fellow surfers, to this sport that had given him so much. He had challenged himself against the very best, both man and nature, and come out on top. As he stepped down from the podium, Jake was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and media, but before he could get swept up in the frenzy, Tom pulled him aside. "Listen, kid," Tom said, his voice low and serious. "What you did out there today, that was something special. But remember, the ocean's always got another wave coming. Stay hungry, stay humble." Jake nodded, understanding the wisdom in his coach's words. "Thanks, Tom, for everything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Jake finally found a moment of quiet. He stood at the water's edge, letting the cool water wash over his feet. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his. "So, champion," she said softly, "what's next?" Jake looked out at the darkening ocean, feeling the pull of its endless possibilities. "You know," he said, a smile playing on his lips, "I hear the waves in Tahiti are pretty good this time of year." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "You're incorrigible, you know that?" "Yeah," Jake replied, squeezing her hand. "But would you have me any other way?" As they stood there, watching the last light fade from the sky, Jake felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had ridden the wave of a lifetime today, but somehow he knew the best was yet to come. The ocean, vast and unpredictable, held countless more challenges. More perfect waves, more moments of pure, unadulterated joy, and Jake Anderson was ready for every single one of them. The roar of the crowd was deafening as Jake Anderson carved across the face of the massive wave. His body moved in perfect harmony with the water, years of training and instinct guiding every subtle shift of weight and balance. The late afternoon sun glinted off the spray kicked up by his board, creating a momentary rainbow that seemed to herald his triumphant ride. As Jake approached the lip of the wave, time seemed to slow. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, feel every droplet of water on his skin. This was the moment that would define the entire competition. His chance to clinch the J-Bay Open title with a move that would be talked about for years to come. With a burst of speed, Jake launched into a massive aerial, his body twisting in a complex rotation that sent gasps rippling through the crowd. For a breathless moment, he was suspended in mid-air, board separated from the wave, defying gravity and logic in equal measure. Then, with practiced precision, Jake reconnected with the face of the wave, the impact shuddering through his entire body. He held firm, crouching low to maintain his balance as he carved back towards the pocket of the wave. "That's it, Jake, you've got this." Tom's voice somehow carried over the roar of the ocean and the crowd, a reminder of the countless hours they'd spent preparing for this very moment. Jake allowed himself a fleeting grin as he set up for the next section of the wave. This was what he lived for, the perfect fusion of man, board, and ocean. Nothing else mattered in this moment. Not the competition, not the crowds, not even the thought vanished as quickly as it had formed, replaced by a sudden primal surge of fear. Something was wrong. Jake felt it before he saw it. A shift in the water, a disturbance in the perfect flow of the wave. Time snapped back to normal speed as Jake caught a glimpse of something breaking the surface just yards ahead of him. Something large, grey, and unmistakably predatory. Shark. The cry went up from the beach, a single word that sent a jolt of terror through everyone present. Jake's mind raced, years of safety drills and worst-case scenario planning kicking in. He needed to get out of the water, fast, but the shark was between him and the beach, and he was still riding a wave with enough power to crush him if he lost focus for even a second. In that split second of indecision, the shark made its move. With frightening speed, it lunged towards Jake, its massive, jaws open wide. Jake reacted on pure instinct. He shifted his weight, using the momentum of the wave to launch himself into the air once more. The shark's jaws snapped shut on empty water as Jake sailed over it, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The landing was rough, the impact jarring every bone in Jake's body. He struggled to maintain his balance, knowing that a fall now would be catastrophic. "Jake, get out of there!" Sarah's terrified voice cut through the chaos, spurring Jake to action. He angled his board towards the beach, pumping his legs to generate as much speed as possible. The wave was dying now, its power diminishing, but Jake used every last ounce of its energy to propel himself towards safety. Behind him, he could hear the thrash of the shark, could almost feel its presence as it gave chase. The distance to the beach seemed impossibly far, each second stretching into an eternity of fear and desperate hope. Suddenly, the roar of a jet ski cut through the air. Jake risked a glance over his shoulder to see one of the water safety team racing towards him, the driver's face a mask of determination. "Hold on, Jake," the driver shouted. "We're coming." Jake redoubled his efforts, his muscles screaming in protest as he pushed himself to the absolute limit. The jet ski was closing the distance, but so was the shark. It was going to be close. Just as Jake felt the last of the wave's energy dissipate, leaving him vulnerable in the open water, the jet ski pulled alongside him. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed the rescue sled attached to the back, hauling himself out of the water with strength born of sheer desperation. The jet ski's engine roared as the driver opened the throttle, accelerating away from the pursuing predator. Jake clung to the rescue sled, his heart pounding as they raced towards the safety of the beach. As they neared the shallows, Jake could see the chaos unfolding on the shore. Lifeguards were frantically waving people out of the water, while officials struggled to maintain order among the panicked crowd. The jet ski slowed as they reached the beach, allowing Jake to slide off into the waist-deep water. He stumbled towards the sand, his legs shaky from adrenaline and exertion. "Jake!" Tom's voice cut through the din as his coach ran towards him, face pale with fear and relief. "Thank God you're all right." Before Jake could respond, he was engulfed. In a fierce hug, it was Sarah, her body trembling as she held onto him tightly. I thought I was going to lose you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jake wrapped his arms around her, the reality of what had just happened finally starting to sink in. "I'm okay," he murmured, as much to reassure himself as her. "I'm okay." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jake was checked over by the medical team, questioned by officials, and surrounded by a constant swarm of concerned friends, fellow competitors, and media. Through it all, the same questions kept repeating. How close had it been? What kind of shark was it? How big? Jake answered as best he could, but the truth was, in the heat of the moment, details had been the last thing on his mind. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the now empty beach, Jake finally found a moment of quiet. He sat on the sand, staring out at the ocean that had nearly claimed his life just hours before. "Hell of a day, huh?" Kai's voice broke through Jake's reverie. His rival settled onto the sand beside him, offering a bottle of water. Jake accepted it gratefully, taking a long drink before responding. "You could say that again. Not exactly how I pictured this competition ending." Kai shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. "Man, when I saw that fin break the surface, I thought you were done for." That was some quick thinking out there. "Honestly, I don't even remember thinking," Jake admitted. "It was all instinct. If that jet ski hadn't shown up when it did..." He trailed off, not wanting to contemplate how differently things might have ended. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. "You know," Kai said finally, "they're talking about canceling the rest of the tour, at least until they can do a full assessment of the shark situation in the area." Jake nodded slowly. He'd heard the rumors, but hadn't had the energy to think about what it might mean for his career. Probably for the best. As much as I love this sport, it's not worth dying for. Kai clapped him on the shoulder. Wise words, my friend. Though between you and me, that last ride of yours before the whole shark thing, that was something special. Champion-worthy for sure. Jake felt a small spark of pride at Kai's words, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of the day's events. Thanks, man. Though right now I'm just grateful to be sitting here. As Kai stood to leave, Jake caught sight of Sarah walking towards them. She had barely left his side since the incident, her fear gradually giving way to a fierce protectiveness that both touched and slightly overwhelmed Jake. Hey, she said softly, settling onto the sand beside him. How are you holding up? Jake shrugged, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Still processing, I guess. It all happened so fast, you know. 1 minute I'm on top of the world, the next. Sarah leaned into him, her warmth a comforting presence against the cooling evening air. I can't even imagine. When I saw that shark, I thought... Her voice caught, and Jake tightened his arm around her. Hey, it's okay. I'm here. I'm safe. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves breaking on the shore with the same indifferent power they had always possessed. So what now? Sarah asked. Finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake took a deep breath, considering the question. His entire life had been building towards moments like today. The perfect wave, the chance to prove himself against the best in the world. But now, in the wake of his brush with death, those ambitions seemed somehow smaller, less important. Don't know, he admitted. For the first time in my life, I really don't know what comes next. Sarah squeezed his hand. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Okay. Jake looked down at her, feeling a surge of affection that rivaled any adrenaline rush he'd ever experienced on a wave. Yeah, he said softly. Together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jake Anderson sat on the beach, the woman he loved by his side, contemplating a future that suddenly seemed both terrifying and exhilarating in its uncertainty. He had faced down one of nature's most perfect predators and lived to tell the tale. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with the same courage and determination that had saved his life today. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and mysterious as ever. But for now, Jake was content to be here on solid ground, grateful for every breath and open to whatever the tide might bring in next. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the beach as Jake Anderson stood at the water's edge, his surfboard tucked under his arm. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, but Jake made no move to enter the water. Instead, his eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the predator that had nearly claimed his life just days before. You don't have to do this. No, Sarah's voice came from behind him, quiet but firm. Jake turned to face her, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. I know, but I need to. It had been 3 days since the shark attack that had thrown the surfing world into chaos. The J-Bay Open had been suspended indefinitely, with officials scrambling to assess the safety of the waters and implement new, protective measures. But for Jake, the world had narrowed to this moment, this challenge he had set for himself. Sarah stepped closer, concern etched on her face. Jake, you nearly died out there. No one would blame you if you needed more time. Jake shook his head, his jaw set with determination. So that's exactly why I have to do this now. If I don't, I'm afraid I never will. Before Sarah could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Tom, Jake's coach. The older man's face was a mask of worry as he approached. Kid, are you sure about this? Tom asked, his eyes darting between Jake and the ocean. We could start smaller, you know, maybe a more protected beach, or... No, Jake cut him off, his voice steady. It has to be here, it has to be now. Tom sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Jake's shoulders. All right, but we're doing this by the book. Safety team in the water, spotters on the beach. You feel anything off? Anything at all? You signal? And we pull you out. Got it? Jake nodded, grateful for his coach's support despite his reservations. He turned back to Sarah, seeing the fear she was trying so hard to hide. I'll be careful, he promised, leaning in to kiss her softly. Need to prove to myself that I can do this. Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. I know, just come back to me, okay? With a final squeeze of her hand, Jake turned and began to wade into the surf. The water felt colder than he remembered, each wave a physical reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the surface. As he paddled out beyond the break, Jake could feel the eyes of the safety team on him, jet skis hovering at a discreet distance. For several long minutes, Jake simply sat on his board, feeling the gentle rise and fall of the swells beneath him. His heart raced, but not with the familiar excitement of an impending ride. This was fear, raw and primal, threatening to overwhelm him. "Come on, Anderson," he muttered to himself. "You've done this 1,000 times, it's just another wave." But it wasn't, and he knew it. Every shadow in the water, every unexpected splash sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. Jake closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to find that connection with the ocean that had always come so naturally to him. Suddenly, he felt a shift in the water, a building of energy that signaled an approaching set. Jake's eyes snapped open, his body tensing instinctively. This was it. Now or never. With a deep breath, Jake began to paddle, positioning himself to catch the incoming wave. As it lifted his board, he felt a moment of pure panic, his mind flashing back to that terrifying moment when the shark had appeared. But memory took over, and Jake found himself on his feet, dropping into the face of the wave. For a heart-stopping moment, Jake thought he would fall, his balance deserting him. But then something clicked into place. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded, replaced by the familiar rush of adrenaline and focus that came with riding a perfect wave. Jake carved across the wave's face, his movements growing more confident with each turn. He could hear cheers from the beach, but they seemed distant, unimportant. All that mattered was this moment, this dance between man and nature. As the wave began to lose power, Jake kicked out, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in days. He had done it. It wasn't his best ride, not by a long shot, but it was a start. Jake paddled back out, catching several more waves over the next hour. With each ride, he felt a little more of his old self returning, the fear gradually giving way to respect, for the ocean, for its power, and for his own resilience. Finally, exhausted but exhilarated, Jake made his way back to shore. Sarah was waiting for him at the water's edge, her face a mix of relief and pride. "You did it," she said softly as Jake approached. He nodded, pulling her into a wet embrace. Yeah, I did." As they walked up the beach, they were met by Tom and a small crowd of onlookers, including several of Jake's fellow surfers who had come to show their support. "Nice work out there, kid," Tom said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "How'd it feel?" Jake considered the question for a moment. "Scary," he admitted, "but good, really good." Kai, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Gotta hand it to you, Anderson. That took guts. Don't know if I could have done it." Jake shook his head. "Sure you could have. Any of us could. It's what we do, right? We face our fears, we respect the ocean, and we keep pushing forward." As the group began to disperse, Jake noticed a man in the official-looking uniform approaching. He recognized him as one of the local marine biology experts who had been consulting on the shark situation. "Mr. Anderson?" the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Hendricks from the Marine Research Institute. I was wondering if I could have a word." Jake nodded, curious. "Of course, what can I do for you?" Dr. Hendricks gestured towards a quieter spot on the beach. "I've been analyzing the data from your encounter," he began, his tone carefully neutral, "and I have to say, it's quite remarkable. The size and behavior of the shark you described, well, it's not typical for this area." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" The scientist sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I'm saying that we might be dealing with something unusual. A great white of that size exhibiting that level of aggression towards a surfer. It's rare, to say the least." Sarah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "But what does that mean for the safety of the surfers? For the competition?" Dr. Hendricks shook his head. "That's what we're trying to determine. We're implementing new monitoring systems, increasing patrols. But the truth is, the ocean is vast, and there's only so much we can control. Jake absorbed this information, feeling a mix of emotions wash over him. Fear, certainly, but also a strange sense of responsibility. He had survived an encounter that, by all accounts, should have been fatal. That had to mean something. "What can I do?" Jake asked, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. Dr. Hendricks looked at him appraisingly. "Well, your first-hand experience is invaluable. If you'd be willing to work with us, to share what you saw, what you felt, it could go a long way towards helping us understand and prevent future incidents." Jake nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "I'll do whatever I can," he said. "If it helps keep other surfers safe, I'm in." As Dr. Hendricks thanked him and walked away, Sarah squeezed Jake's hand. "You sure about this?" she asked softly. Jake looked out at the ocean, watching as another set of waves rolled in. The water glittered in the sunlight, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. He thought about the fear he had faced today, the triumph of overcoming it, and the knowledge that others might benefit from his experience. "Yeah," he said finally, turning back to Sarah with a small smile. "I'm sure. This is bigger than just me now. It's about all of us who love the ocean, who respect its power but can't stay away from its beauty." As they walked hand in hand along the beach, Jake felt a sense of purpose settling over him. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with uncertainties and likely more than a few moments of fear. But he had faced down death and come out the other side. Whatever came next, he would meet it head-on with the same determination that had carried him through the biggest waves and the darkest moments. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and unknowable as ever. But for the first time since the attack, Jake looked at it not with fear but with renewed respect and a determination to understand. He had always known that surfing was more than just a sport. It was a way of life, a connection to something greater than himself. Now he had the chance to give back to the community that had given him so much, to help ensure that future generations of surfers could experience the same joy and passion that had driven him all these years. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jake Anderson stood on the edge of a new chapter in his life. The waves continued to roll in, a constant reminder of the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. But with Sarah by his side and the support of his surfing family behind him, Jake felt ready to face whatever the tide might bring. Dusty, sterile smell of disinfectant filled Jake's nostrils as he sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his right leg stretched out before him. The stark white bandages covering his thigh were a vivid reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. He flexed his toes, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through his leg. "Easy there, champ," Dr. Ramirez said, looking up from her clipboard. "Those stitches are holding well, but let's not push it just yet." Jake nodded, letting out a frustrated sigh. "How long until I can get back in the water, Doc?" Dr. Ramirez's expression softened. "Jake, you've just survived a shark attack. Your body needs time to heal. We're looking at least 6 to 8 weeks before you can even think about surfing again." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. 6 to 8 weeks. An eternity in the world of professional surfing. He could feel his dreams of the World Championship slipping away with each passing second. "But the tour," Jake began, his voice trailing off as the reality of his situation sank in. "We'll still be there when you're healed," a familiar voice finished. Jake looked up to see Sarah entering the room, a forced smile on her face as she carried a duffel bag of his clothes. Dr. Ramirez nodded approvingly. "Listen to your girlfriend, Jake. She's got the right idea. Now, I'll be back to check on you in a bit. Try to rest." As the doctor left, Sarah set the bag down and perched on the edge of the bed, taking Jake's hand in hers. "How are you feeling?" Jake attempted a smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Like I got hit by a truck, or, bitten by a great white." Sarah's laugh was shaky, tinged with the remnants of fear. "Well, your sense of humor is intact. That's something." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on them. Jake's mind raced with questions and concerns. Would he be able to regain his form? Would sponsors stick by him during his recovery? And lurking beneath it all, a fear he didn't want to acknowledge. Would he ever feel safe in the ocean again? Her knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Tom poked his head in, his weathered face creased with concern. "Hey, kid. Up for some visitors?" Before Jake could respond, the room was suddenly filled with a whirlwind of activity. Kai burst in, followed by several other surfers from the tour, all talking at once. "Anderson, you crazy bastard," Kai exclaimed, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "Only you could stare down a shark and live to tell the tale." Jake managed a genuine smile this time. "What can I say? I'm hard to kill." The room buzzed with conversation as his friends recounted the incident from their perspective, each version seemingly more dramatic than the last. Jake found himself swept up in their energy, the camaraderie momentarily pushing aside his darker thoughts. So Mick, one of the veteran surfers, asked during a lull in the conversation, "What's the plan now, mate? You gonna be ready for Tahiti?" The question brought the reality of Jake's situation crashing back. He swallowed hard, looking down at his bandaged leg. "Doc says 6 to 8 weeks minimum. I'm out for the season." A heavy silence fell over the room. In the competitive world of professional surfing, an injury like this could be career-ending. They all knew it, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Kai was the first to break the silence. "Hey, don't count yourself out yet. You're Jake Anderson. If anyone can come back from this, it's you." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, but Jake barely heard them. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating points, considering wild card entries, anything that might give him a chance to salvage his season. As if reading his thoughts, Tom stepped forward, his expression serious. "All right, boys, let's give Jake some space. He needs his rest." The surfers filed out, each offering words of encouragement as they left. Soon only Tom, Sarah, and Kai remained. "How are you really?" "Doing, kid?" Tom asked, his gruff voice softening. Jake let out a long breath. "I don't know, Tom. I keep replaying it in my mind. One second I'm on top of the world, the next, you're shark bait," Kai finished, earning a sharp look from Sarah. "Not helping, Kai," she said, squeezing Jake's hand. Kai held up his hands in surrender. Sorry, dark humor, you know. It's how we cope." Tom pulled up a chair, leaning in close. "Listen, Jake, what happened out there? It was 1 in a million. A freak accident. But you survived. You're here. That's what matters." Jake nodded, but the gnawing fear in his gut remained. "Yeah, but what if I can't do it anymore, Tom? What if I get out there and freeze up?" The room fell silent, the question hanging heavy in the air. It was the fear they'd all been avoiding, the unspoken concern that had been lurking beneath the surface. Sarah was the first to speak. "Then you'll face it, just like you've faced every other challenge in your life, and we'll be right there with you." Kai nodded in agreement. "She's right. Man, the whole surfing community's got your back. Whatever you need, we're here." Jake felt a lump forming in his throat, overwhelmed by the support. "Thanks, guys, I mean it." As the conversation continued, Jake found his spirits lifting slightly. The road ahead would be tough, no doubt about it. But he wasn't facing it alone. Knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Dr. Ramirez entered, followed by a man Jake didn't recognize. "Jake," Dr. Ramirez said, "this is Dr. Hendricks from the Marine Research Institute. He'd like to talk to you about the incident, if you're feeling up to it." Jake straightened up, curiosity piqued. "Sure, of course." Dr. Hendricks stepped forward, his expression a mix of concern and scientific interest. "Mr. Anderson, first let me say how glad I am that you survived this ordeal. What you experienced, well, it's quite extraordinary from a scientific perspective." Jake raised an eyebrow. "How so?" The marine biologist pulled up a chair, his excitement barely contained. "The size and behavior of the shark you encountered are highly unusual for this area. We've been tracking great white populations along this coastline for years, and we've never seen anything quite like this." Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What does that mean exactly?" Dr. Hendricks spread his hands. "It means we might be dealing with an anomaly, a shark that's ventured far from its usual hunting grounds, or possibly even a previously unknown population. Your encounter could be crucial in helping us understand and prevent future incidents." Jake felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Fear certainly at the thought of other surfers facing what he had, but also a sense of purpose. If his experience could help protect others, "What do you need from me?" Jake asked, his voice steady. Dr. Hendricks smiled. "For now, just a recollection of the event. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small, and perhaps when you're recovered, you might consider working with us in a more official capacity." Jake nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. Yeah, I think I'd like that." As Dr. Hendricks began his questions, Jake felt a shift within himself. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath everything else. But alongside, it was something new, a determination to turn this near tragedy into something positive. Hours later, as the hospital room finally quieted, Jake found himself alone with Sarah. She curled up beside him on the narrow bed, careful of his injured leg. "You okay?" she asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I think I will be." Sarah lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "You know you don't have to do this, right? Work with the researchers, I mean. No one would blame you if you wanted to just focus on your recovery." Jake shook his head. "I know, but I think I need to do this. For myself and for every other surfer out there. If I can help make the ocean safer, even a little bit, doesn't that count for something?" Sarah smiled, a mix of pride and concern in her eyes. "It counts for a lot. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself too, okay?" Jake pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "I promise." As they lay there in the quiet hospital room, Jake's mind drifted to the ocean. He could almost hear the crash of the waves, feel the salt spray on his face. The fear was there, a dark shadow at the edges of his consciousness. But alongside it was something else, a renewed respect for the power of the sea, and a determination to face that power head-on. Whatever came next, Jake knew it wouldn't be easy. The physical recovery, the mental hurdles, the uncertainty of his future in professional surfing, all of it loomed large. But as he drifted off to sleep, Sarah's steady breathing beside him, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. He had survived. He was still here, still breathing, still dreaming. And as long as that was true, anything was possible. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the beach as Jake Anderson stood at the water's edge, his surfboard tucked under his arm. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, each one a tempting call to action. But Jake remained rooted to the spot, his eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of longing and apprehension. "You ready for this?" Tom's gruff voice came from behind him. Jake turned to face his coach, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. "As ready as I'll ever be, I guess." It had been 8 weeks since the shark attack that had nearly cost Jake his life and his career. 8 weeks of grueling physical therapy, of battling nightmares, of wondering if he'd ever feel at home in the ocean again. Now, standing on the same beach where it had all happened, Jake felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. Tom clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder, his weathered face creased with concern. "Listen, kid, there's no shame in taking more time if you need it. No one's pushing you to get back out there before you're ready." Jake shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "No, I need to do this. If I don't get back on the board now, I'm afraid I never will." As if on cue, Sarah appeared beside them, her face a mask of worry and support. "Just be careful, okay? And remember, we're right here if you need us." Jake nodded, leaning in to kiss her softly. "I know. Thanks for being here, both of you." With a deep breath, Jake began to wade into the surf. The water felt colder than he remembered, each wave a physical reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the surface. As he paddled out beyond the break, Jake could feel the eyes of the safety team on him, jet skis hovering at a discreet distance. For several long minutes, Jake simply sat on his board, feeling the gentle rise and fall of the swells beneath him. His heart raced, but not with the familiar excitement of an impending ride. This was fear, raw and primal, threatening to overwhelm him. "Come on, Anderson," he muttered to himself. "You've done this 1,000 times. It's just another wave." But it wasn't, and he knew it. Every shadow in the water, every unexpected splash sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. Jake closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to find that connection with the ocean that had always come so naturally to him. Suddenly, he felt it, a shift in the water, a building of energy that signaled an approaching set. Jake's eyes snapped open, his body tensing instinctively. This was it, now or never. With a deep breath, Jake began to paddle, positioning himself to catch the incoming wave. As it lifted his board, he felt a moment of pure panic, his mind flashing back to that terrifying moment when the shark had appeared. But muscle, memory took over, and Jake found himself on his feet, dropping into the face of the wave. For a heart-stopping moment, Jake thought he would fall, his balance deserting him. But then something clicked into place. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded, replaced by the familiar rush of adrenaline and focus that came with riding a perfect wave. Jake carved across the wave's face, his movements growing more confident with each turn. He could hear cheers from the beach, but they seemed distant, unimportant. All that mattered was this moment, this dance between man and nature. As the wave began to lose power, Jake kicked out, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in weeks. He had done it. It wasn't his best ride, not by a long shot. But it was a start. Jake paddled back out, catching several more waves over the next hour. With each ride, he felt a little more of his old self returning, the fear gradually giving way to respect, for the ocean, for its power, and for his own resilience. Finally, exhausted but exhilarated, Jake made his way back to shore. Sarah was waiting for him at the water's edge, her face a mix of relief and pride. "You did it," she said softly as Jake approached. He nodded, pulling her into a wet embrace. Yeah, I did." As they walked up the beach, they were met by Tom and a small crowd of onlookers, including several of Jake's fellow surfers who had come to show their support. "Nice work out there, kid," Tom said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "How'd it feel?" Jake considered the question for a moment. "Scary," he admitted, "but good, really good." Kai, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Gotta hand it to you, Anderson. That took guts. Don't know if I could have done it." Jake shook his head. "Sure you could have. Any of us could. It's what we do, right? We face our fears, we respect the ocean, and we keep pushing forward." As the group began to disperse, Jake noticed a man in an official-looking uniform approaching. He recognized him as Dr. Hendricks, the marine biologist he had been working with since the attack. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Hendricks said, extending his hand. "Impressive display out there. How are you feeling?" Jake shook the scientist's hand, considering the question. "Better than I expected, honestly. It's still intense. But being back in the water, it feels right." Dr. Hendricks nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's good to hear. Listen, I was wondering if you had a moment to discuss some of our recent findings. We've made some interesting discoveries since our last conversation." Jake exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Sure, Dr. Hendricks. What's up?" The marine biologist led them to a quieter spot on the beach, away from the crowd. "We've been analyzing the data from the tagging program you've been helping us with," he began, "and we've noticed some unusual patterns in shark behavior. Along this coastline," Jake felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm sun. "Unusual how?" Dr. Hendricks pulled out a tablet, bringing up a map dotted with colored points. "We're seeing more great whites in the area than we'd typically expect this time of year. And their movements, well, they're not following the usual migration patterns." Sarah leaned in, her brow furrowed. "What does that mean exactly?" The scientist sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Honestly, we're not entirely sure. It could be a result of changing ocean temperatures, shifts in prey populations, or something else entirely. But what we do know is that it's increasing the likelihood of human-shark encounters." Jake absorbed this information, feeling a mix of emotions wash over him. Fear, certainly, but also a strange sense of purpose. "So, what can we do about it?" Dr. Hendricks looked at him appraisingly. "Well, that's where you come in, Jake. Your experience, combined with your platform as a professional surfer, could be invaluable in educating the public and promoting safe practices." Jake nodded slowly, ideas already forming in his mind. "I'm done whatever I can do to help prevent what happened to me from happening to someone else." As they continued to discuss potential outreach programs and safety initiatives, Jake felt a renewed sense of direction. The shark attack had nearly ended his career, but it had also opened up a new path, one where he could use his passion for surfing to make a real difference. Later that evening, as Jake and Sarah walked along the beach hand in hand, he found himself pausing to watch the sunset. The ocean stretched out before them, a canvas of orange and pink reflecting the fading light. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah asked, squeezing his hand. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. "I was just thinking, a few months ago I thought my life was over, my career, my dreams, everything. But now," he trailed off, gesturing towards the ocean. Sarah smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Now you have a new purpose." Jake nodded. "Yeah, it's not what I ever imagined for myself, but I think it might be even more important." As they stood there, watching the last light fade from the sky, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fear wasn't gone entirely. He suspected it never would be, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, it had transformed into a driving force, pushing him to make a difference in the world he loved so much. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves breaking on the shore with the same power they had always possessed. But now Jake saw it with new eyes, not just as a playground or a competition arena, but as a complex ecosystem that needed protection and understanding. "You know," he said softly, turning to Sarah, "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." Sarah leaned into him, her warmth a comforting presence against the cooling evening air. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." As they made their way back up the beach, Jake cast one last look at the darkening horizon. The ocean had nearly taken everything from him, but in doing so it had given him something new, a chance to redefine his legacy, to use his voice for something bigger than himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new waves to conquer. But for now, Jake Anderson was content in the knowledge that he had found his way back to the water, and in doing so, had discovered a new path forward. The journey ahead would be difficult, but with Sarah by his side and the support of his surfing family behind him, Jake felt ready to face whatever the tide might bring. The fluorescent lights of the physical therapy center buzzed overhead as Jake Anderson gritted his teeth, pushing through another set of leg exercises. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his muscles screaming in protest as he fought to complete the repetitions. "Come on, Jake, 2 more," his therapist Maria encouraged. "You've got this." Jake let out a grunt of effort, forcing his injured leg to extend fully. The scar tissue pulled uncomfortably, a constant reminder of the shark's powerful jaws. As he completed the final rep, Jake collapsed back onto the exercise mat, breathing heavily. Maria handed him a towel and a water bottle. "Great work today. You're making excellent progress." Jake took a long drink before responding. "Doesn't feel like it sometimes. I should be back on a board by now." Maria's expression softened. "Recovery isn't a straight line, Jake. You've come incredibly far in a short time. Don't sell yourself short." As Jake gathered his things to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the gym's mirror. The scar on his thigh was still an angry red, a jagged reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. He quickly looked away, not ready to confront that reality just yet. Outside the center, Jake found Sarah waiting for him in her car. Her face lit up as he approached, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "How'd it go today?" she asked as he slid into the passenger seat. Jake shrugged, buckling his seatbelt. "Same as always, push until it hurts, then push some more." Sarah reached over, squeezing his hand. "You know, it's okay to take it easy sometimes. No one expects you to bounce back overnight." Jake let out a frustrated sigh. "The tour doesn't wait, Sarah. Every day I'm not in the water is another day I'm falling behind." They drove in silence for a while, the tension palpable. As they neared their apartment, Sarah spoke up again. "I talked to Tom earlier. He mentioned that the WSL is considering offering you a wildcard entry for the upcoming event at Tihupo'o." Jake's head snapped up, his heart racing. Tihupo'o was one of the most challenging breaks on the tour, known for its heavy, hollow waves and razor-sharp reef. Under normal circumstances, it was a daunting prospect. Now, with his injury still healing— "What did you tell him?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Sarah pulled into their parking spot, turning off the engine before answering. "I told him it was your decision to make. But Jake, are you sure you're ready for something like that?" Jake stared out the windshield, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of him thrilled at the opportunity to get back in the game, to prove to himself and the world that he was still a contender. But another part, a part he was trying desperately to ignore, was terrified. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I have to try, don't I? If I don't take this chance, I might never get another one." Sarah turned to face him, her expression serious. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Jake. Not to me, not to Tom, not to the surfing world. The only person you need to be okay with is yourself." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. I need to feel like myself. Again, you know. And I don't know how to do that if I'm not surfing." They made their way up to their apartment in contemplative silence. As Jake showered and changed, his mind kept circling back to the wildcard offer. It was a lifeline, a chance to salvage his season and maybe his career. But the risks, later. That evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sun set over the ocean, Jake's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Kai. "Hey man," Jake answered, putting the phone on speaker. "What's up?" "Anderson." Kai's voice crackled through the speaker. "Heard about the wildcard offer. You gonna take it?" Jake exchanged a glance with Sarah before responding. "I'm thinking about it. Not sure if I'm ready, though." Kai's laugh came through the line. "Ready? Bro, you were born ready. Look, I know. It's scary after what happened, but you can't let fear keep you out of the water forever." "It's not just fear," Jake protested. "My leg's still not at 100%. "So you adapt," Kai countered. "You find a new way to ride. That's what makes a true champion, man. The ability to overcome, to evolve." As they continued to talk, Jake felt something shift inside him. Kai's words, brash as they were, had struck a chord. Maybe he didn't need to be the exact same surfer he was before. Maybe this was an opportunity to reinvent himself. After hanging up, Jake turned to Sarah. "What do you think? Am I crazy for even considering this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think," she said, slowly, "that surfing is part of who you are. And I think that if you don't at least try, you'll always wonder what if." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. "So you think I should do it?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of love and worry. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But if you do decide to compete, promise me you'll be careful. No unnecessary risks, okay?" Jake pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I promise. Thank you for believing in me, even when I'm not sure I believe in myself." The next morning, Jake called Tom to accept the wildcard offer. The following weeks were a blur of intense training, both in and out of the water. Jake pushed himself harder than ever, working with his physical therapist to develop new techniques that would minimize strain on his injured leg. As the day of departure for Tahiti approached, Jake found himself standing on the beach at dawn, surfboard in hand. The waves were small, barely worth riding, but that wasn't why he was here. Jake waded into the water, feeling the familiar rush as the cool ocean enveloped him. He paddled out beyond the break, sitting up on his board to watch the sun rise over the horizon. In that moment, as the first rays of light painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and mysterious as ever. But for the first time since the attack, it didn't fill him with dread. Instead, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting to reclaim his past. He was paddling towards a new future, one where he could use his experience to educate others about ocean safety, to promote conservation efforts, to be a voice for the surfing community in ways he'd never considered before. As he caught his first wave of the morning, Jake felt the familiar thrill of dropping into the face, of becoming one with the water. But there was something else too, a deeper appreciation for the power and beauty of the ocean and for his own resilience in the face of adversity. Later that day, as Jake boarded the plane to Tahiti with Sarah by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to recovery had been long and difficult, but it had led him to this moment. "You okay?" Sarah asked as they settled into their seats. Jake looked out the window at the receding coastline, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I finally am." As the plane took off, carrying them towards Te Hupo'o and The next chapter of their lives, Jake felt a sense of excitement building in his chest. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he was ready to ride that wave, wherever it might take him. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore filled the small community center as Jake Anderson settled into a folding chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Around him, a circle of faces showed varying degrees of anxiety, hope, and resignation. This was Jake's first time attending a support group for shark attack survivors, and despite his usual confidence, he felt oddly vulnerable. "All right, everyone." The group facilitator, a middle-aged woman named Carol, began. "We have a new member joining us today. Jake, would you like to introduce yourself?" Jake cleared his throat, suddenly aware of all eyes on him. Hey, I'm Jake Anderson. I'm a professional surfer, or I was attacked about 3 months ago during a competition at Jeffreys Bay." A murmur went through the group. Jake's attack had made international news, and he could see recognition dawning on several faces. "Welcome, Jake," Carol said warmly. "We're glad you're here. Remember, this is a safe space. You can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with." Jake nodded, grateful for the lack of pressure. As the meeting progressed, he found himself drawn into the stories of his fellow survivors. There was Michael, a scuba instructor who had lost his left hand to a bull shark in the Caribbean. Sarah, a teenage girl still struggling with PTSD after a close encounter while swimming at her local beach. And Robert, an older gentleman who had survived an attack decades ago, but still found solace in the group's support. As Jake listened, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of connection, of finally being among people who truly understood what he had been through. But there was also a gnawing guilt. Unlike many in the group, he had escaped relatively unscathed physically. His career might be in jeopardy, but he still had all his limbs, his life. "Jake?" Carol's voice broke through his thoughts. "Would you like to share your story with the group?" Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Sure, I guess I should start at the beginning." He began to recount that fateful day at Jeffreys Bay, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. He described the perfect wave, the rush of adrenaline as he carved across its face. And then, the sudden, heart-stopping moment when he saw the shark. It was like time slowed down, Jake said, his eyes distant with the memory. "I could see every detail, the grey skin, the black eye, the rows of teeth, and then it was on me." He described the impact, the searing pain as the shark's teeth tore into his thigh, the struggle in the water, the desperate paddle to shore, the blur of the rescue and hospital. "The physical recovery has been tough," Jake admitted, "but it's the mental side that's really thrown me. I've been surfing since I could walk. The ocean has always been my home. And now I'm afraid of it." The room was silent as Jake finished speaking. Then slowly others began to share their own experiences of fear and recovery. "It gets better," Michael said, his voice gentle. "It never goes away completely, but you learn to manage it, to respect the ocean without letting the fear control you." Sarah, the teenager, spoke up. "I had nightmares for months, still do sometimes, but talking about it helps. Being here with people who understand, it makes a difference." As the meeting wound down, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, not just to share his own story, but to hear others who had walked the same difficult path. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Robert approached Jake. "First time's always the hardest," the older man said with a knowing smile. "But you did good, kid." Jake nodded, grateful for the encouragement. "Thanks. I wasn't sure about coming, but I'm glad I did." Robert's expression grew serious. "Listen, I know you're probably feeling a lot of pressure to get back out there, to prove something, but take it from someone who's been where you are. There's no shame in taking your time. The ocean will still be there when you're ready." Jake absorbed this, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "But what if I'm never ready? What if I can't get past this fear?" Robert placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Then you find a new way to connect with the water. There's more than one way to be a surfer, Jake. Sometimes the biggest waves we have to conquer are the ones in our own minds." As Jake left the community center, he found Sarah waiting for him in the parking lot. Her face was a mix of concern, and hope as he approached. "How was it?" she asked, pulling him into a hug. Jake held her tight, drawing comfort from her presence. "It was intense, but good, I think. Really good." They walked hand in hand towards the beach, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink over the water. Jake felt the familiar pull of the waves, the desire to paddle out, warring with the fear that still lurked in the back of his mind. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked softly, sensing his inner turmoil. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the waves roll in. "I'm thinking maybe it's time to try again. Not a big wave or anything, just to feel the water, to remember why I fell in love with this in the first place." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Are you sure you're ready?" Jake took a deep breath, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "No," he admitted, "but I think that's okay. Maybe being ready isn't about not being afraid. Maybe it's about facing that fear head on." They made their way down to the water's edge. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the cool spray on his face, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Slowly he began to wade in, Sarah by his side. The water was cold, sending a shock through his system. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him, but Jake pushed through it, focusing on his breathing, on the feel of Sarah's hand in his. As they got deeper, Jake felt a shift. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but alongside it was something else, a sense of homecoming, of reconnecting with a part of himself he thought he'd lost. "You okay?" Sarah asked, watching him closely. Jake nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, I think I am." They stayed in the water as the last light faded from the sky, Jake gradually rediscovering the joy of being in the ocean. He didn't try to catch a wave or even to swim very far. For now, this was enough, to be here, to feel the water around him, to take this first small step towards reclaiming his life. As they finally made their way back to shore, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be long and challenging, he knew. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the fear threatened to overwhelm him. But he also knew he wasn't facing this alone. He had Sarah, his family, his fellow survivors from the support group. And he had the ocean itself, vast and powerful, capable of great destruction but also of incredible beauty and healing. Jake looked out at the darkening horizon, feeling a mixture of respect and determination. He might never be the same surfer. He was before the attack, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was an opportunity to become something new, a surfer who understood the true power of the ocean, who could use his experience to help others, to make a difference in the world of surfing and beyond. As they walked back up the beach, hand in hand, Jake felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, one wave at a time.